I now call Michael Russell to close the Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary. 10 minutes or thereabouts, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And as ever with a debate like this, there have been some really good contributions and there have been some dire contributions. The good ones are right across party. I have to commend Alec Rowley, Patrick Harvey, Willie Rennie. I disagree with him on some of the points he made, but I thought it was, as we said, valuable as a contribution. Claudia Beamish, Annabel Ewing, Jackie Bailey. But it's easy to spot the dire ones because they were all from the Tory benches, with one exception. I'm going to come back to that exception at the end of what I say. And they were also characterised by 2 points in common in all those dire speeches. And they're curious points because they're facts that are utterly wrong. If it is true, as each of the speakers asserted, those Tory speakers, that regulatory convergence was essential for trade, why are we leaving the EU? It's absolutely untrue that regulatory convergence is essential for trade, and yet that was the point that they made. And the second point is not the second point. No, I won't. You've had your opportunity. Presiding Officer has had his opportunity. I want to respond to the points that have been made. And I shall come to the points that Mr Lockett has made in a moment. The second point that was common to these Tory speeches was an assertion that there were lots of powers which, if you rejoined the EU, you would just give away again. The reality is there aren't lots of powers coming back. That's absolutely clear. That is simply untrue. But it does say something about the view of the EU. The Tory members do not recognise that Scotland, as an independent member of the EU, would have vastly more powers than it has as a member of the UK, and that is irrefutable. And the idea that, in some sense, being a member of the EU simply means handing powers to Brussels is, at worst, just a tabloid invention, but at best now simply the Tory party philosophy. So let me make a third point that underpins these absolutely clear. Scotland voted to remain in the EU. And that is a fact that's simply been ignored by every Tory member. They don't want the reality of this situation. Scotland does not want to have the Tories drag them out of Europe. And that is also irrefutable. But I have to say, of all the dire speeches, I think it's a hard job to decide which was worse. But I have to say, it really has to be Peter Chapman's, for one particular reason. It was an encyclopedia of irrelevance, completely. It was a cornucopia of nonsense and negativity. But there was one thing in it that really did worry me. Because Mr Chapman asserted during the speech that Scotland would not become a member of the EU if it was independent. Now, on the one side of this argument, you have Peter Chapman. On the other side of this argument, you have the former President of the Commission, Lord Van Rompuy, you have Lord Kerr, you have endless EU diplomats and others. Who would you receive? Who would you trust? The former President of the Commission or Peter Chapman? I think I know who I would trust. But actually, what worries me about this, and Mr Chapman is grinning there as if there is some virtue in being put in this, because what really worries me about this is that anybody at all, whether they were in Scotland or not, would somehow be happy at the fact that a small, talented country like Scotland would be refused membership of the EU. I find that just extraordinary. And what's more extraordinary is that somebody who is a member of this Scottish Parliament would be happy at that fact. I give way to Mr Chapman.
Peter Chapman.
The reason that an independent Scotland would not be allowed into the EU is because your fiscal deficit is 3 times greater than it would be allowed you to get in.
Cabinet Secretary.
And again, it proves 2 points. One was the relish with which that was said. And the other one was that if the President of the European Commission can say to my face, the former President, that we would be able to join, I'll take his word for it, not the word of the Doric Donald Trump. Now, let us move onwards. I should have welcomed Dean Lockhart to his new role. It's always good to see who will be against you over the next few months. I have to say I was disappointed. I think that slavish loyalty is not the thing that spokespeople should do, nor should you argue that black is white and white is black, which was clearly what was being done. But I am, at the end of this contribution, Presiding Officer, going to make a positive suggestion for Mr Lockhart, some way in which he can redeem himself from the rather bad start that he has had today. Because the bad start, of course, was not simply because of his contribution, but because the arguments are against him. If you go through all these submissions from organisations, there are more, you find the overwhelming weight of the argument from Scottish organisations is against the UK government's proposals. Overwhelming. And not just Scottish organisations. There's an astonishing letter from the PACAC committee at Westminster, which actually contradicts virtually everything that Dean Lockhart said. The SCDI expressed themselves not convinced that the legislative approach is the right priority. The Royal Society of Edinburgh is not convinced that legislation is required. The National Farmers Union says it is clear that common frameworks could provide a more effective alternative to manage divergence while respecting devolution. Even the House of Lords Committee on the Constitution, not full of mad gnats by any manner of means, is not convinced that legislation is required. And then when you look at the detail of some of these submissions, the General Teaching Council, again, not a terribly radical body, looking at the issue of teacher qualifications, saying these proposals undermine a historic and continuing right in Scottish education. And more interestingly still, the submission of the Clyde fishermen, which points out that proposals from the UK government actually will make the internal market worse, not better. And as for the history, it is a complete misrepresentation of the historical background, particularly of the Act of Union. But the White Paper stands revealed today for what it actually is. It is a power grab, a cobbled-together power grab, motivated by fear that Scotland will stand in the way of the bad trade deals that are being done. It is an amateur attempt at legislation, unduly influenced by a former Tory MP. It's an expression of the deep antipathy, indeed the contempt towards devolution that is held by Boris Johnson and his government. It is an astonishing admission of the failure of the UK government to recognise the reality of what the EU single market is and its value, and try to rewrite that in a form of rules that would not even pass muster at first attempt in Europe. But it could also be an opportunity for Mr Lockhart. Because Mr Lockhart could look at this, could look at what I think will happen this afternoon, which is a vote against the White Paper. He will look at the clear view of so many stakeholders, and he could also listen to the wise caution of one of their own members. Because I thought Adam Tompkins' contribution was the best that I have heard him make. It's ironic that the best contribution I've heard from him on the Constitution comes when he is no longer the Constitution spokesperson, but that's life. I think that what he said on the legal underpinning of frameworks was very significant. And I do think the principles of proportionality and subsidiarity pointed out in this chamber in a quote I used from David Edward 2 weeks ago are fundamental to the discussion that we're having. And without that, mutual recognition and non-discrimination cannot operate without those principles in place. So how would that be taken forward? Well, I disagree with Mr Tompkins, as I would disagree with him on the issue of compulsion. I do not think there is a place in this for compulsion, but there is a place in this for agreement, as I indicated to the committee last week, and I will indicate again here. I have never said that we should not work and use the frameworks as the foundation for the future. In fact, I've always said that that's what we should do. And that is why my officials have worked so hard to establish the frameworks. I hope Mr Lockhart will correct the record in what he said, that we did not take part in framework discussions, because we did. So in these circumstances, I will give way.
Dean Lockhart.
Thank you very much. I should have made it clear that Mike Russell walked out of discussions on the internal market. Given his concerns about mutual recognition and the request, in some respects, to have various exemptions in place for Scottish business under mutual recognition, does he not recognise that was a massive lost opportunity 18 months ago, walking away from those discussions and the ability to represent business? That has been a wasted opportunity, Cabinet Secretary.
The record will show that I withdrew our officials from the discussions on the internal market because I believed, and I was right to believe, that these would lead to a proposal that would undermine devolution. It has proved exactly as I said it would. Indeed, I should be thanked for having taken that action. But I have never walked away from the discussion of frameworks. And if there is a will in the UK government not to impose upon this Parliament or the Welsh Assembly or the Northern Irish, but to sit down and continue the discussion of frameworks, as I said to the committee last week, I make another offer. which is, of course, there will be no changes. I believe that these proposals are a set of proposals looking for a problem which doesn't exist, but there will be no changes to the arrangements that take place. Those frameworks will operate as if they were in place until they are in place, and that is something I would commit myself to, and I'm sure other governments would do that too. So here's an opportunity for Mr Lockhart. He doesn't seem yet willing to take it, but I hope he will. Let him go to the people for whom he speaks elsewhere and say to them, look, this is the wrong set of proposals. And it's not just Scottish Parliament that says it, though it says it. It is the vast range of stakeholders in Scotland. Let us find a better way forward. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Today that man is Adam Tompkins. I hope his own party are listening to him.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate.